I am very excited to get this conversation this evening going about rising to this moment, so I'm happy to welcome to the stage to get us started J Street's director in Israel, Yael Patir, and two of our first panelists, Rabbi Jill Jacobs, Executive Director of Trua, and Daniel Sokach, the CEO of the New Israel Fund. Electric, our connection. Yael, you're going to be my partner this evening as we weave together the voices of friends and allies and political partners who will help us define the challenges that we face and articulate some of the new strategies that we have for rising to this moment.
J Street, good evening. Erev Tov, Masa El Khair. I'm so thrilled to be here tonight and to bring on stage not only a group of exceptional change leaders, but also a conversation that is so essential to our future. You know, in the past, Jeremy and I, in the very many years that we worked together, and in the very many trips and visits to Israel or to the US, we always joked about the shift in our interaction that happened in the last 3 years. There had been times when Americans, you, came to Israel and asked us, what has happened to you? How come your democratic institutions are under attack? What's up with the way that racism is being normalized? And most importantly, why can't you get rid of this guy?
Which guy?
Well, now you know. Unfortunately, yes. Not that I wished it on you, or for us, or on us, but at least for me, it's no longer so hard to explain it to you. Unfortunately, you now gain firsthand, our American partners, of that experience of what it's like to face the challenges that we've been living with for quite some time. So let's talk about these challenges, shall we? Rabbi Jill Jacobs, good evening. Your work leading Trua, working with the network of thousands of rabbis to advance human rights in North America, Israel, and the occupied Palestinian territory, puts you in a unique position to comment on the commonalities that we face. Can you share with us your analysis? What are we facing in terms of growth of xenophobia and threats to liberal democracies? And also, what can we learn from our Jewish tradition about these developments?
First of all, thank you so much, both to Yael and Jeremy, and really kol hakavod on this conference. It's so inspiring to come to the largest gathering of progressive Jews anywhere, certainly anywhere in the United States. And I want to say, we'll talk about this more later, but the relationships that we've built and the partnerships between these three organizations on stage and many more have been really one of the things that's been giving me a lot of hope as we grapple with the rise of autocracy and the attacks on democracy in both of our countries. It's true that Trua is, I believe, the only organization in the Jewish social justice space that has a commitment to work 50-50 on North America and on Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. We organize more than 2,000 rabbis and cantors together with their communities to bring a moral voice to fighting for human rights, both here in North America and also in Israel and the occupied territories. So working in both these places is either a blessing or a curse, depends. But it does mean that we encounter the same trends in both places and can learn from what happens in one place about what's happening in the other. So we're seeing, as Yael just said, a rise in autocracy across the world. And what comes with it is violent nationalism and attacks on democracy. When Masha Gessen writes about the rise of Putin, she notes that some of the first steps that he took were to attack the media, the independent judiciary, to attack the right to protest, and to attack civil society organizations. Unfortunately, we're seeing that all of the world's autocrats are using the same playbook. So whether it's the attempt to purge the Supreme Court in Poland, or the smear campaign against civil society organizations in Hungary, Or in Israel, the attacks on civil society organizations, the attacks on media, the introduction of a bill to try to limit the power of the Supreme Court, or in the United States, the attacks on the New York Times and the Washington Post as fake news, the attacks on judges, on the Federal Reserve and other democratic institutions, the attempts to weaken these institutions, proposals to limit protests. We're seeing that all of these autocrats are working from the exact same playbook, and unfortunately we see the countries that are a little farther along into autocracy, we see how dangerous that is for everybody, including Jews. So we know from history that autocracy is never good for Jews. In fact, in the Bible, when the Israelites first ask for a king, the prophet Samuel tries to dissuade them. He already knows it's going to be a very bad idea. And he tells them that a king is only going to seize their property, he's going to put them into slavery. So it was really good advice, which they didn't take. And we're still learning this lesson. Even a little further back in the Bible, Joseph thinks that if he depends on this powerful ruler, he can save his people. And it works for a little while, it works for a few generations, but of course we know what happens in the end, that depending on one powerful ruler never saves the Jews from being oppressed in the end. So we know that Jews have been persecuted, have been exiled, have been killed when there are dictatorships. And we know also that Jews have thrived in liberal societies, in societies that protect individual and group rights. And the best way that we know how to protect these rights right now is democracy. And so the best thing for Jews and for everybody else is to protect our democracies in both countries. We've seen as part of this, the rise of autocrats, we've seen the alignment between Netanyahu and Trump and some of the other autocrats around the world. Now, Netanyahu has made the choice that aligning with Orban and Trump and Putin is good for his political fortunes, and we'll see how that turns out. Maybe in the short term it was. Now the story has yet to be written. And we've seen that there are some Jews who believe that the little gifts that Trump gives Israel and his stated support for Israel and for the Jews are good for the Jews. It means that he's going to protect us. But we know from history that that's just not going to happen, that this embrace between Netanyahu and Trump and the other autocrats around the world is ultimately going to be extremely dangerous for all of us, for democracy, for all minorities, and absolutely including Jews.
Thanks, Jill. Daniel, first of all, it is so good to be back on the main J Street stage with you. I remember back 10 years ago this week, it was the very first J Street conference, and you and I appeared on the stage together. And we said at that point that it was so important for there to be a partnership between J Street working in the United States and the New Israel Fund working in Israel. And we talked about the need to build a broader movement across all of these many organizations across the two countries that shares a set of goals and a set of values. And I just want to step back for a moment and say thank you for a decade of really good partnership. And in the spirit of really good partnership, J Street also wanted to take a moment and step back and say congratulations to the New Israel Fund, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year.
Thank you.
So to celebrate this historic milestone and to acknowledge the important work that NIF does, we asked your team to put together a very short video featuring some of the highlights of the past 40 years. So we'd like to see this quick video by way of introducing New Israel Fund's work.
Hi, I'm Mickey Gitzin, the Executive Director of the New Israel Fund in Israel. For 40 years, the NIF has built the foundation of Israel's civil society. 40 years of impact, 40 years of partnership, 40 years of standing up for equality and justice for all people in Israel. We are funders, grantees, activists, organizers, and thought leaders. And as we look toward the future, we know there is so much more we can accomplish together.
the New Israel Fund was the first organization that I met when I was 17 years old. Being in this intersection as a woman in a patriarchal system and also as a second-class citizen of the State of Israel as a Jewish state, the New Israel Fund enabled me to translate this suffering, this pain into positive and empowering actions.
This organization knows how to be one step ahead of everybody else on issues of what is needed to create a progressive, decent, and peaceful Israel.
11 years ago, I participated as a workshop funded by the New Israel Fund on how to build Palestinian civil society in Israel. New Israel Fund's workshop opened my eyes, and I couldn't close them anymore since then.
It's given voice to civil society. It has created human rights and civil rights organizations. It's allowed marginalized groups to be empowered and to speak out. And all the time, consistently, it promotes true, profound democracy in Israel.
אני חושב שהתרומה הכי גדולה מהמקום של החברה הערבית במיוחד זה התרומה הענקית של הקרן לחיבורים בין ערבים ויהודים.
Over the past decades, we in ACRI, together with other civil societies organizations, were under constant attacks by governments and by non-state actors. Despite all the threats, NIF has succeeded in preventing dozens of critical organizations from being silenced.
בזכות הקרן החדשה אני מרגיש אופק לשינוי אמיתי במדינה.
Because of NIF, I know that I can promise a better future to my 3 daughters and for every child in Israel.
My vision is that my son Muad would walk one day in Dizengoff in Tel Aviv as a proud and equal citizen.
NIF makes me feel optimistic.
Israel's democracy faces many challenges ahead, but the New Israel Fund will face them head-on. History has not yet been written. If history bends towards justice, it will be because those who stand for democracy, for equality, and for justice decided to stand and face the odds together. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for your partnership.
Good job, Team NIF. Daniel, it's so great to partner with you and with Libby Lankinsky, NIF's Vice President, and Miki Gitzin that we saw in the video, Israel Director, and the tremendous staff, not only in the US and in Israel, but also around the world. So we've begun this evening articulating some of the trends and threats that we are fighting against at this moment. And it's also important when we're building something, right, a winning movement, to name what is not only what we're fighting against, but also what we're fighting for, especially when we're talking about rising to the moment. So Daniel, my question to you is, what do you see as the core values that progressives can offer as a rallying cry at this seminal moment, as we counter the agenda that Jill so articulately described? And what is it? What is it that we are fighting for, really?
Well, first of all, thank you, Yael and Jeremy, and thanks for that wonderful treat. You know, when we talk about values, I'll get to values, but there is the value of what you guys are doing here and what you have created here, and it's pretty extraordinary. 10 years ago, Jeremy, when we spoke on this stage, it was actually my first public appearance as the new head of the New Israel Fund. And it was just around that time that what Nomi Chazan described then as a democracy recession began in Israel and then spread far beyond Israel. And so the value of being the bridge between progressive American Jews and progressive Israelis, and now progressives around the world, is something that New Israel Fund has stood for the last 40 years. And that's a value that you guys have taken upon yourselves of strengthening that bridge between progressives in our countries. But look, as Jill said, we stand at a perilous moment because for the last 10 years, we have seen this terrible growth, and we've had to ask ourselves and figure out the ways in which those points are connected. What's happening in Israel and here in our own country and in Brexit UK and in Hungary and these things are part of a global trend of anti-democratic rise. And so we have to be the democratic pushback. And I would suggest that the values that animate us, equality, justice, and human rights, are at the core of our pushback in our own countries, and we have to see them as connected just as the folks who are arrayed against us are connected. Because the fact is, if we look at what happened in Israel, we have Ayman Odeh saying that he thinks wonderfully the New Israel Fund is the change that we need in Israel. It's Ayman Odeh and those NIF grantees who are the change that we need in Israel, right? And when we see what happened at the election in Israel, and by that I mean the most recent election in Israel, we saw Palestinian citizens of Israel roaring back to the voting polls. We saw Jewish Israelis rejecting Kahanists, rejecting Jewish fascists. And when we saw the midterms in this country last year, and when we see what's happening now in this country in terms of how more and more Americans see what's going on, when we see what's happening in the cities of Hungary, where opposition mayors are winning back the mayoralties, right? And we see what's happening with Brexit UK when Tory rebels are leaving the Conservative Party to push back against the hard Brexit. We should identify that as nodes, points on a line of democratic pushback. And that will only happen and only continue if we remember that, we all love the MLK quote, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It will only happen if we, in Israel and in the US and beyond, bend that arc, and that's how we'll win.
So, one of the topics we're digging into tonight is the how. How do we bend that arc, right? How do we change the shape of events? We've talked a bit about the threats, and we've talked a bit about the values that, in fact, motivate us to rise to this moment and ensure we succeed. J Street's always been proud to make it a point to use our national conference as a platform to highlight the work of so many incredible organizations who are our partners day in and day out. It's always been a question, though, for me as to whether and how we could actually build on the sort of day-to-day work and what happens here in the hallways and in the conference and build a deeper partnership that allows us to harness our power across organizations and make us even stronger as a movement. So this summer, 10 organizations, most of them are represented in this hall, and most of them have tables in the hallways outside, came together to start something we called the Progressive Israel Network to deepen our collaboration here in the United States. Let's hear it for the Progressive Israel Network. Jill, true as one of the founders of PIN, as we affectionately call it, and you personally have really been a staunch advocate of collaboration among all of these organizations and a really great thought partner for us in thinking this through. Could you talk for a moment about the Progressive Israel Network and share with the audience a bit about the power we feel in working together in partnership?
Thank you so much. This is an incredibly exciting development. Now, we know that the way that people think about how the Jewish community thinks about Israel actually doesn't make any sense, because we know that all of the polling, some done by J Street and other organizations, show that the majority of American Jews support a two-state solution, support an end to the occupation, generally consider themselves pro-Israel, and are highly critical of the Israeli government. So one would think that that would mean that everybody knows that that's what Jews think about Israel. But instead, we know that the dominant voice that comes from the Jewish community, what in general both Jews and non-Jews think Jews think, is actually a right-wing Israel voice. And that's pushed forward by a number of communal organizations, by strong funding on the right, that actually doesn't at all represent where most Jews, including, of course, those of us in this room, actually sit. So we all know that, and so it's been frustrating to feel like that voice isn't getting heard, the voice of the majority of Jews. And we've had amazing organizations, the 3 on the stage and the other 7 that are in the Progressive Israel Network, and yet our collective voice wasn't necessarily being heard as strongly as it could be as a collective voice. And so we came together, as Jeremy said, to form the Progressive Israel Network so that we can have a collective voice that represents the majority of American Jews. In political spaces, in communal spaces, in media, in all of the spaces in which we operate. And it's a voice that supports the long-term security of Israel side by side with a Palestinian state, an end to occupation, protection of democracy for Israelis and for Palestinians, and the self-determination of both people. So these are organizations that have been working together in different capacities for a long time, doing different projects together, but we're now taking it to the next level in order to make our voices stronger. We know that the right wing is extremely coordinated. They know what they're fighting for, and they're working together. And we're the majority, so we should be able to do that, and even better, even more strongly. So already we've been coordinating some actions together, coordinating statements together. We're using our collective voice to put out into the world our values, the values of the majority of American Jews. We're going to be working in the next few months to make sure that everybody knows that the majority of American Jews oppose any attempts by either the Trump administration through their so-called peace plan, or if there continues to be a Netanyahu administration or any other administration to attempt to annex parts of the West Bank. So we're going to be saying that very strongly in a loud collective voice. And we also, as hopefully everybody knows already, we're working together to run a slate in the World Zionist Congress elections. Now, when you hear that, you might think, isn't that something from like the 19th century? Does that still exist?
Yes.
Yes, it is from the 19th century. And it's a body that controls $1 billion, and that was billion with a B, which is no small amount of money. And so we're going to be running a progressive slate that we hope all of you will register and vote for, and tell your friends to register and vote for, so that we can get these values representing the majority of North American Jews on the agenda of the World Zionist Congress.
I want to just take a moment to put in a plug for our slate. I think all of us may well be on that slate. It's called the Hatikva slate, and there's a table amongst the many tables out there where you can put your name and your email address on a list so that when the voting opens, and it's a 3-month voting period, we will let you know. There's also a session, it may have happened already today, I don't know if it was earlier or if it's tomorrow, to explain what the World Zionist Congress is, but I really want to urge, if all the people attending this conference got 1 or 2 other people to vote, we could actually significantly shift the results of this election, which will have a real impact on funding that goes to the settlement division and the way in which that money is used in Israel. Daniel, I just want to say, NIF's been a great partner in the Progressive Israel Network. Is there anything that you want to add about our work together?
Yeah, well, I'll say 2 things. I'll be slightly less diplomatic than my dear friend Jill, because I'm not a rabbi. You know, as you say, there's been a sort of right-wing communal agenda that has been the voice of the American Jewish community when it comes to Israel that is not in any way reflective of how the overwhelming majority of American Jews and all the polls that you mentioned feel about the issues in Israel and the relationship between American Jewry and Israel. And it is beyond time for that majority voice to claim its ownership of the discourse. And so the Progressive Israel Network is sort of step 1 in the reclamation of that powerful voice. And that's something that I have to say, you know, that bridge that I mentioned earlier, it is clearly a 2-way bridge now. And, you know, I heard one of our wonderful grantees, Alon Lee from Standing Together, earlier today talk about how it's not just that American Jews can support and offer help to progressive Israelis. It's also now that progressive Israelis, as we've heard again and again, we turn to progressive Israelis to support us. And this sort of 2-way bridge is going to happen if we claim our power, as we must in this country, and if our brothers and sisters in Israel, I'm looking at you out there, if you think carefully about the kinds of places that you come when you come to talk to the American Jewish community, this is the stage that we need you to show up on. These are the voices that we need you to support.
What a great bridge to our next conversation.
And we didn't write his answer
No,
even.
that's great. That's great.
Although we sometimes like to do that. Thank you so much, Jill and Daniel. It's really nice to have the opportunity to lefargen. There's no word for it in English, right? But to lefargen to each other, to share the love in a way. And thank you for your leadership. And you gave me a good bridge to move to our second part, which is about another piece in the architecture that we're investing in. And that is the Progressive to Progressive Transatlantic Alliance, which is about building bridges that will connect American and Israeli progressives. And it is happening in all sorts of ways and means. And also I think all of us are coming together to make it more powerful and more organized. And as we said, this is really vis-a-vis or in front of political forces on the right that have forged a very strong alliance for several decades already that has helped them secure significant political and policy victories in both the US and in Israel. The recent elections in Israel just highlighted that, and perhaps more than ever before, that strong bond that exists today between the Republican Party and the Israeli right was exemplified on huge billboards. Who have seen those billboards? Huge billboards on the side of roads and on buildings with a huge Netanyahu next to a huge Trump.
Now there should be a Putin.
And a Putin, but that was on a different ad. At the same time, Israeli and American liberals are in retreat. It's not as easy for us to work together. And we have not responded effectively, I think all of us, to the challenge, to the moment, and to what is happening on the other side of the political spectrum. And many have sort of grown despondent, have fatigue also. So to counter this political alliance on the right and the despair on the left, Israeli and American progressives on this stage and others have come together in an informal way, which we call a progressive to progressive transatlantic alliance. And through this effort, we're sharing lessons, we're seeing whether our work can serve each other, we can strengthen each other respectively and together through such cooperation. J Street, NIF, and TRUA are deeply engaged in building these bridges in their respective work and together over the past few years. And I want to invite to the stage our other panelists who have been waiting behind for a long time that are also part of this work. So help me welcome Rami Hod of the Beryl Katzenelson Foundation Center, New York City Councilman Brad Lander, and Tel Aviv Deputy Mayor Chen Arieli. Here is good, next to me. Hi. Rami, let's start with you. Hi. You've recently done some research and writing about the connection between the right in Israel and the right in the US, correct? And you write, and I quote, in Haaretz, in Haaretz op-ed in English, so you should all read it. But here's the quote. It is important to understand the involvement of US-based foundations and thinkers in the war of ideas in Israel, primarily since it illustrates why Israeli progressives and their American partners keep swinging and missing. So why is that, Rami?
First of all, I want to say thank you for this amazing conference. I just want to say one thing before I answer the question. I heard you refer to the Prime Minister Netanyahu as the Prime Minister. We in Israel call him the temporary Prime Minister because he wasn't elected in the in the elections. I think that a precondition for any discussion on how to rebuild the left, how build a progressive power in Israel, needs to understand the following. The ideological right who support the settlements doesn't have a political majority in Israel. We saw it in the election. We see it in every poll. Even after 10 years of Netanyahu, the majority of Israelis still, right, they have lack of trust towards the Palestinian, but they don't support the settlement project. There's still a majority for the two-state solution. On social economic issues, there is a majority for progressive. On state and religious issues, Israelis are moving to the left. So what the right did is, in order to change this, they have built a new political, organizational, ideological machine that sometimes we in the left, both in Israel and in the States, don't really understand. And I'm not referring to Sheldon Adelson funding a propaganda newspaper of the temporary prime minister. I'm referring to a political machine that is constantly trying to push the political debate in Israel to the right. We tend to talk a lot about annexation in the last last 2 days, but where did annexation, where is the political word, where is the term come from? It came from this political machine of think tanks, educational organization, training organization, funded by American conservative Jews that are doing two basic things. One, pushing the debate to the right, promoting the radical, fanatic ideas. And second thing, which is, again, less known, but I think it's the most important thing that the right is doing in the last decade, trying to put the right people in the right places, trying to retake power, trying to be in the public service, in the army, in the media, in local government, in national government, places where we kind of neglected. So I think that we should understand it, and we should understand it because in order to build the left, we should better understand the right. Now, we in the left, during these crucial years that the right has built its political machine, trying to push the debate for the right, we have done amazing work in building a great civil society, as we saw before in the video clip. We have built NGOs who are promoting women's rights, LGBTQ rights, minority rights, but we kind of neglected the big systems. We kind of neglected the places where the struggle over the soul of Israel is taking place. And we kind of chased after the tail of the right. We kind of we were very reactive and less proactive. We woke up every morning and saw what is the next bad thing that the right-wing government is trying to do. Let's fight it. What is the next nation-state law, annexation, bad social economic policy? Let's fight it. We should have fight it, and we're going to keep on fighting it, but in the same time, I think that we need to change our focus. Because the primary focus on progressives in Israel is not moral outrage. It's building a political camp. It's building power. And in order to build power, we have some lessons that we need to take from the right. We need to promote positive ideas, not only saying what the right is doing wrong, saying what we can do better. We need to be in positions of power when the same systems that we kind of neglected. So this is, in 3 minutes, what we have to learn, I think.
I want to pick up on the issue of money, and I want to ask Jill. Your organization, Trua, has looked very, very closely at some of the flows of money that take place between the right wing here and the right wing in Israel, American and Israeli institutions. They're involved in settlement activity, they're involved in land grabs, they're facilitating and pushing creeping annexation. What are some of the things that you have seen specifically about the flows of money that make all of this possible from the United States?
Thank you. First of all, a lot of times in the United States, in the Jewish community, we think, oh, we have no responsibility for what happens in Israel. They can make their own decisions. We don't have any role. It's not our fault. But actually, a lot of what's happening in Israel is funded by American money, and specifically American conservative right-wing money. This is work that, as Rami mentioned, the Beryl Katz-Nelson Center has been looking very seriously into funding, for example, by the Tikva Fund. Rami has a fabulous article in Haaretz a few weeks ago that you should find if you haven't already read it, about the extent to which this American conservative money is entrenching the occupation, is building think tanks, and is importing the worst of American right-wing ideas into Israel. And so that's mostly Jewish, also evangelical Christian, conservatives. I want to be clear, when Rami said conservative Jews, he meant with a small c. I'm a conservative rabbi with a big C, very different. So conservative money is going to fund really the attacks on democracy, the entrenchment of the settlements, importation even of ideas like busting unions. Right? Israel is built on labor unions, and in the United States, there's been a massive attack on unions over the last number of decades, and so there are some people who are trying to import those same bills, those same policies into Israel. Now, at Trua, we've been looking at the use of American money to fund both settlements and also the most extreme extremists. So in 2015, we got interested in where the money from JNF USA goes. Now, everybody who's ever been to Hebrew school or any other Jewish institution, from the time you're 2 years old, you're putting these little coins in the blue boxes to plant trees in Israel. So what does JNF USA actually do with that money? Most of it does not go to trees. Sorry, spoiler alert. Most of it does go inside of the Green Line. But we noticed that even though anecdotally we had evidence that JNF was funding projects outside of the Green Line, that JNF actually didn't list on their website anywhere a list of all of their projects. And so we started getting Jewish community members, rabbis, to call their local JNF offices. I met with the executive director. We had lots of calls both to the national office and to local JNF offices saying, hey, we've been putting these coins in these blue boxes since we were 2 years old, and we don't actually want to support settlements. Can you please tell us where the money's going? And in 2016, JNF USA, for the first time, published a list of where their money goes, of all of their projects, both in Israel and the occupied territories. And it was absolutely a response to the pressure by American Jews. In fact, they called me to find out whether I would now tell people to give to JNF USA. And I said, I need to look a little closer into the list. So I can say that they are still putting money into the settlements, but it's less and less every year, and they've continued to be transparent. If you look up their 990, their tax form, you can see a list of their projects. And second, also since 2016, we've been filing a series of complaints with the IRS around foundations in the United States, a series of foundations that are sending a total of about $22 million to the most extreme organizations in Israel. And I'm talking about the organizations that are participating in violence and terrorism against Palestinians, against progressive Jews, the organizations that are the inheritors of the Meir Kahane tradition, often same people, certainly the same ideology and the same tactics. And we've been complaining that Kahane Chai and Kach, the two organizations associated with Meir Kahane, are listed as foreign terrorist organizations. And so these organizations that have different names now but the same tactics should not be able to receive tax-exempt U.S. money. And we know that in at least one case, the IRS did investigate and at least short-term close down the flow of money, and we're still pushing to make sure that $22 million of American money doesn't go to support extremists in Israel.
Brad, hey, you have a lot of experience with progressive network building. You're a founder of Local Progress, which is a national network of progressive local elected officials, as well as Progressive Caucus in the New York City Council. So shout out to the New Yorkers in the crowd. I'd love for you to share with us, what are your thoughts on why should progressives come together? What do we benefit from these alliances? And what are the pitfalls also of such alliances?
Look, I think Rami got this just right. If we share the values that Jill and Daniel and everyone else here is talking about of justice and equality and genuinely inclusive multiracial democracy, but then we wake up every morning amidst systems that trample on those values, then the obligation we have is to build political power to uphold them. And the right has done a better job of building political power through long-term institution building. And we know it's a long-term struggle, not just one election. It's not just getting rid of Trump and Netanyahu if we want the big structural change that puts those values into action. Now, I'm an elected official, but I know that kind of power is built on the ground. It's built on the outside. Our strategy of change cannot be like elect good people to office and cross your fingers that they will do the right thing. That kind of power has to be built in our community organizations and our synagogues and our workplaces and our campuses, strong long-term institutions. But we do need better models for the kinds of inside-outside partnerships between movement progressive organizations and elected officials. And that means being honest about some of the challenges in doing so. First, I think it's underappreciated how much democracy, by its own internal logic, is a system for over-selecting people who are desperate for ego gratification to be the societal decision makers. And I don't mean to exempt myself. And being an elected official, it means having an obsessive focus on building your own brand, on asking everyone you've ever known for money, on like knocking on doors and then saying the cause is me. There's something wrong with that. It is not healthy, sort of a disorder, really. But to counterbalance that, we have to build partnerships that enable us to play progressive politics as a team sport, with institutions that organize around values and build relationships both of accountability and generosity. That's why we built the New York City Council Progressive Caucus, despite being told by Democratic leadership not to do it, why we built this national network of 1,000 elected officials around the country, Local Progress, the folks who are winning a $15 an hour minimum wage for millions of workers, rent regulations and tenant protections, decarceral criminal justice policies aimed at ending mass incarceration. And we work in partnerships with elected officials at the state and federal level, like Pramila Jayapal, who will be here tomorrow. And we had our national meeting in Detroit, and Rashida Tlaib inaugurated us all into the squad. And it's through those relationships that I've gotten to build these kind of progressive-to-progressive partnerships with folks like Chen Arieli and Amjad Shabti, a Palestinian-Israeli municipal elected official, that make it possible to build both from our movement relationships, but also relationships with others in a big team. And if we're building power for the long term, one, it always has to be done with movements. And it's got to be done both with a kind of accountability that is pushing, that is holding elected officials accountable, that is calling us out when we're speaking BS, but also that looks to build team solidarity so you can be honest with people, so you can build the kind of relationships that make it possible to give tochecha, the kind of accountability that comes from love, not just from transactions. But then I think it's also important to recognize that playing politics as a team sport also means how do we not get so focused on our micro team identities that we make the broader movement building work we have to do, especially at this moment to fight the authoritarian right, possible. We're seeing that now in the Democratic primary between our candidates and in the progressive space I occupy between people like me who are supporting Elizabeth Warren and my friends who are supporting other candidates and especially those who are supporting Bernie Sanders. So last week when Bernie came to Queens, I tweeted, "No secret that I'm Team Warren, but I'm wishing a great day to all my friends going to see Bernie Sanders in Queens. Congrats on the AOC and squad endorsements. Of course, we're a little jealous. Looking very forward to when we're back on one big justice-seeking team together." And lo and behold, a few hours later comes back a tweet from AOC. "Thanks, Brad Lander. We should all be grateful to have strong progressive leadership to choose from. For many, it's a tough choice precisely because of how great they are. I'm confident we will all come together on the other side, stronger than ever." And it takes time. Yeah, that's worth clapping for AOC finding solidarity with somebody who's sitting up here on the J Street stage. It takes time to build those deep relationships inside, outside, but it's necessary and we are capable of it.
Great. Khan, yes, you deserve it. Khan, let's talk about that building of a movement, bringing the social movements in, overcoming differences. You have a lot of experience in that, both as an elected official and as someone who led the LGBT movement in Israel. And you needed to mobilize broad support between people that don't necessarily agree, but you knew that broad support is crucial in order to win the struggles that you had to win and bridge gaps and disagreements. So what has that experience taught you about how those bridges could be built over disagreements inside our progressive camp that doesn't always necessarily like to come together, and also between Israelis and Americans?
I think that my first short answer to that as a feminist will be, we need more women leadership around. Because we sure know how to handle disagreements, don't we? As a female leader, I led the Israeli LGBT community, and I feel that for me, being a feminist, openly gay lesbian, helped me, helped me overcome those disagreements, because the LGBT community, we only look like happy and rainbow and beautiful. We have lots of disagreements because it's a community that's kind of made of those different identities and different needs within one community itself, and we need to manage one struggle. And it's similar to other struggles we're trying to build in our camp. I believe that we need to be practical, and I prepared 3 practical tips for my experience. The first one, I think we need to drop the identity politics. Our identities are important. It's important for me to be here and to say I'm the first openly lesbian deputy mayor of Tel Aviv. But this is not what's connecting us. What's connecting us is values and ideas, and not our identities. And it's not enough to be connected by identities. We need to believe in the same things. This is my first short tip. My second one is we need to adopt the policy of nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. You probably know that. But in every room there is a discussion. We need to bring the one who is most affected from that discussion into the room. So the human nature urges us to push the conflict out of the room and to say, we'll deal with that later. We'll sit here, our white privilege us, and decide together what to do with this or that. But I say, let's be brave. Let's bring the conflict inside the room from the beginning, from the early stages, and it will be easier to overcome the disagreements and even to decide that we disagree, but we can agree on a mutual action that we go forward with. And this is really important to fight the urgeness of to push the conflict out of the room all the time. And we need to be brave and to put it there from the first angle. And from my experience, holding that method of nothing about us without us in the daily basics is really helpful to develop a much wider and equality perspective on activism, on our work on the ground, because it's immediately bring those wide perspectives into the room, and it's really recommended. Thank you. And the third thing I want to recommend is we need each other. Revolutions are not made alone. I can stand up on a right hill and shout my lungs out, and if no one come with me, I'll be a crazy lady shouting on the top of a hill. We need each other. We need partnerships, as Brad mentioned. We need to build those bridges. And when we argue about disagreements, we need to remember that at the end of the day, we're both on the same side and we want the same things. We want to change reality for the better. And we need to do it together. Thank you.
So we've talked a little bit about what we are fighting against. We've laid out some of the values that we're fighting for. We've talked a bit about a couple of new efforts, the Progressive Israel Network and this Transatlantic Progressive to Progressive Alliance, these new efforts that are being pursued to build power both in the US and across the Atlantic. Now it's time to turn our attention to some of the coalitions that need to be built in Israel to rise to the moment there. We know that no one segment of society can do this and fight this battle alone. No one political party, because it's a crazy political system. In fact, that's an understatement. In fact, one strategy of the right is to set one segment of Israeli society against the other, Jew versus Arab, secular versus religious, Ashkenazi versus secular, Ashkenazi versus Mizrahi. To beat them, we have to build this broad movement. We have to build that powerful coalition. We have to work at the grassroots, and most importantly, we have to work in politics. We have to, as Brad said, take power. The next group of movement leaders who we're welcoming into the conversation know a little bit about these challenges and about building coalitions. Please join us in welcoming to the stage Maya Peretz from Koach La'ovdim and Fida Nara, co-executive director of Mapach Tajir.
You can stay, Rami. Thanks for joining us, Maya and Fida. You're, I wanted to say that you're the icing of the cake, but I don't know if it will be politically correct or not, so save the best for last. One of the things that both of you have in common is that you're leading grassroots efforts very much on the ground with communities in Israel that we would not generally call progressives, right? I would even say that communities that are antagonistic to the left. And I want to bring President Rivlin to help me. In 2015, he defined Israel as a society made out of 4 tribes that are fighting each other. I think that there are surely more. But indeed, when we look at voting patterns in Israel, they show us that Israelis vote very much according to religiosity and to identity. Mizrahim will not vote for labor because of what is perceived as the historic sin towards them, and Maya, you can push against me on that. Arab citizens will not vote for Zionist parties. Ultra-Orthodox will only vote for their sectorial parties, and so on and so on. We talked about our crazy system, but it represents something in our society. So, Fida, I want to start with you and to ask you, how can we overcome this tribalism? But also, Fida, do we need to?
I think we need to, but first of all, I want to start. Those from you who don't know, the PDS attacked the Palestinian participant in the J Street conference. I decided to stay here and to talk here to bring my minority issues and address all our problems in this room especially, because I know that all of the people here believe in human rights, in justice, in equality, and building better place for all of us. But the most important thing, you as a minority who live here in America can understand me as a minority who live inside Israel. So this is really important to understand the situation that we are. It's very unique rule. I think you need to give different identity, enough space to express themselves. That way, they were less afraid from each other, and then we can build a shared society. Very strong shared society, because people know exactly what is their identity, and then they can understand and start to talk with the other, the different from them. When we have building a shared society, strong shared society, we can have strong democracy. When we have strong shared society, we can fight racism. We can fight all the problems that we have inside Israel. But we can fight together to have peace and end the occupation and end all the settlement and the way that they treat Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. What's really... Thank you. Strong partnership will build a strong democracy, and this is what we need. First of all, we should give each identity enough space to express herself, and then we can be more, build together our work together as a shared society. In Mahbah Taghir, we, as an Arab Jewish organization, we deal with feminist education, we work in the periphery in Israel, with Jewish and Arab. First of all, we want people to be awareness to their daily problem, and then build active citizenship, and then community organizing. That way people become more responsible of their daily life, and then they can be more comfortable to start to build a shared society, and that's how we will have strong democracy. Thank you.
Great. That's a really good point, and I want to build on that, and Maya, to ask you, what is the potential of the left to broaden the coalition? In the last election, I think we talked a lot about, and post-election, and analyzing, whether the left has indeed managed to live up to what many tried to do, to broaden, to bring people that are not your traditional people on the left. So I want to ask you about this potential. And is it about overcoming differences? Is it about creating a left that feels like home for people that don't feel that way today?
So I think that when we're trying to think about broadening the camp or the community, one of the main things that come to my mind is interest. Because I think that people like to identify with other people that share the same interest as them. And I think that one of the things that we as left camp need to do also, like towards ourselves, is look really, really inside and think, do we actually have the same interest as the rest of the communities that we want to represent? And I think that a lot of the time the answer is not necessarily. I mean, we are very much culturally something like that is very much identified, and mostly, I think, economically wise, we are definitely very much in a certain place, which is very much identified and like not necessarily will be people from outside of the camp will feel shared interest in that point, especially economically wise. And I think that this is where we should also understand that we need to do compromises and understand that there we should also give up things and we should in that way try and bring people more inside. And two other points that I think that are very important to that also is that I think that in a way, I was thinking about it today, that I feel that in Israel we kind of have radical right wing and kind of conservative left wing. And I think this is something else that we really, really need. We need radical left that thinks about the reality and how to actually create a different reality, and it does need radical or progressive thinking in order to do that, and I think this is something else that is very much missing. And the last point that I think that is crucial is that we need to go outside and talk to actual people, and actually seeing people, that they will see us, that we have meetings, that it won't be only on Facebook or on Twitter and places that are like kind of a reality but not really. And this is like really crucial also for us to go outside, to create also public spaces that we can actually meet up in. I know that as a like worker organizer, I am missing those places. I have no places that we can meet and we can share either than the workplace of like our workers, and this is crucial, something that is missing.
Right. So you have to go.
So Brad, I want to turn back to you. I appreciate deeply, Fida, your comments about being here despite the pressure not to be here. And Brad, I want to, absolutely. In the American context, on the progressive movement here, there is a pressure on Jews who want to be part of progressive spaces to not show their support for the state of Israel. And there's a tendency to make this a litmus test issue of whether you belong in or out of the tent. And a few months ago, and by the way, there's a comparable pressure on Jews who want to be in the Jewish community not to express their criticism of Israel. So you wrote an article a few months ago, and you said, and I'll quote, you called for better terms among American progressives between liberal American Jews who see anti-Semitism resurgent and often hear it in criticism of Israel, and those on the emergent left for whom Israel is a U.S.-backed violator of Palestinian rights. You also confessed in that article that you've not always been where you think you should have been in opposing occupation and advocating for Palestinian self-determination. So what can you share about your journey on this issue that allows you to now speak out, and how do you push through in that context to make sure that your voice is heard?
First, I got to say how inspiring it is to be on this stage with Chen and Fida, and my 16-year-old daughter came to J Street this weekend, and like, what an incredible opportunity to have her be able to imagine a world where leadership looks like these guys and not like maybe you and me and Daniel so much. I mean, that is a serious blessing, and I'm really deeply grateful for it. I'll try to be really honest here. For elected officials, and definitely for progressive Jewish Democrats like me, who on the one hand consider ourselves progressive Zionists and believe proudly in Israel as a Jewish and democratic state on the one hand, and who on the other hand hate the occupation and care deeply about the human rights of Palestinians, the political incentives are just to keep your mouth zipped tightly shut. And that's really what I did for most of my decade in office, to try to calibrate every tweet so carefully that you say almost nothing at all. And I will say, and I'm grateful to both J Street and New Israel Fund for this, the progressive to progressive retreat that we had last year was really an important moment for me in building relationships with people like Chen and Maya and Amjad, who I mentioned before, and Avner Gvaryahu, who's here, and if not now, activists like Emily Mayer and Simone Zimmerman, who are here. I was pushed to find more courage. And that meant taking a really honest look at what I had been up to. And I feel like over the past decade, I have spent more time policing the BDS line than I have opposing the occupation, standing up for human rights of Palestinians, and building real solidarity with progressives in Israel and Palestine. And it is out of the set of relationships built there and over the past year that I feel required to and have committed to do more. So I wrote the piece in BuzzFeed that you mentioned, calling for better relationships between left and center-left, because we cannot let our divisions mean that authoritarian right-wing populists exploit them and build more power. Later, when I saw Bernie Sanders stand behind that Jews Against the Occupation sign that If Not Now has out there, I knew I had to do that too. So on Tisha B'Av this year, when 40 of us got arrested as Jews Against ICE outside the Amazon store on 34th Street, a dozen rabbis, we spent the evening in jail together. I took a picture behind that sign as well. I'm opportunity to J Street U include formal opposition to the occupation in the DNC platform. And I'll certainly be encouraging my presidential candidate to support that as well. And finally, I'm reflecting on my role as a local elected official as well. You know, in the New York City Council, we would never let the mayor spend billions of dollars on a blank check. We insist that we pay workers a living wage, that we target affordable housing to those who need it most deeply, that we close Rikers Island, that we don't incarcerate kids. We target our payments to achieve our values, and through the partnerships that I've been lucky to begin building, I'll be encouraging other local elected officials, state elected officials, members of Congress, and maybe even the odd presidential candidate to think the same way about our foreign aid as well.
Han, I want to ask you also to comment on that as somebody who's an Israeli progressive moving in progressive circles outside of Israel. You often have to face accusations of pinkwashing, or that Israeli progressives are not doing enough to fight the occupation and bring peace. And that we know that in order to do all these things, you need to secure political power, right, to bring that change. But I want to ask you, what do you think that Israeli progressives can do to make a convincing argument to the other Bradlanders that didn't have the chance to meet you yet, right, and are either keeping their mouths shut or just moving away from the topic, or don't find it possible for them to cooperate with Israeli progressives at all?
I was accused in pinkwashing so many times. Whenever I meet a group from the United States and Israel, and I'm doing that like almost once a week, I'm counting when is the pinkwash question will pop up. It's probably popping up in the second question, and if they're polite, it is the fourth question. And I'm not pinkwashing. I'm not Netanyahu that only knows how to say LGBT in English and does not know how to say it in Hebrew or in Arabic. I'm coming from the civil society, and behind that serious accusation are thousands of activists and organizations that are working on the ground and fighting for human rights in Israel. And we need to understand that when we accuse something or someone that doing pinkwash, the government is pinkwashing, and to replace the government, we need to build a political power. But the criticism is also a bit correct, because the civil society in Israel, in my eyes, we're getting to a glass ceiling. It's the end. We must put the fear aside us, and we need to stop being afraid to taking a stand. In my first years as the chair of the Israeli LGBT task force, I was afraid to take a stand, a political stand. And now I realize that we have to take a stand within the civil society, and not just to take a stand. We need to get ourselves inside Israeli politics, because we need more of us in there. Because if you want to promote those ideas, those progressive ideas, we need our own partnerships to be in power positions. And I want to encourage civil society leaders to jump in. It's really hard to do that. After 25 years in the civil society, I jumped into the politics, and I chose local politics because I believe local politics is a part of building a political power. And to go to sit at the Knesset won't help that. And we need to restrain and to bring the respect back to the local politics, because the left has left the local politics. And the right now is all over the local politics, all over Israel. And we need to bring the progressives back into the cities, the small cities, to the ground, and to help people on a daily basis. And this is the way to promote the revolution. So this is actually what I have to say. Encourage us to be more political, encourage us to take a stand, encourage us to say our opinion out loud, and within the power position we can do it.
Right. Frida, I want to move to you just quickly to see if you want to add something to that, because you also did that move this year, right? When you put yourself this year on the ballot of Hadash party, and because of the joint list, you were only part of Hadash, so you couldn't get in, but you were prominently put on the Hadash list, on number 8 on the list. And you also did that move of moving from civil society to politics. Do you want to maybe just add something to what Chen said?
I see civil society as a political action because you want to make a change in the balance of power. So it's a political action. But when you are active in a party, and actually I think I'm grown up in a party, so it's part of my life, it's you choose to change inside the places that have more power. So it's and as a feminist, it's more challenge, like Chen said. But it's important because if you want just to work with the people who think exactly like us, so it will be Chen, me, and Maya. Even Rami is not with us. So yes, so I think it's very, very, very important. It's really challenge rule, and I really appreciate Chen, what did you do? But this is the way that we can make a change, bring new voices as a feminist, as a leader from the social movement, and bring it to the political level. And bring more youth. It's important. So it's yes.
Great. Rami, what do you see as the building blocks of this alliance of power that we are talking about?
I think maybe the most important thing that we should do is to learn from successes. We in the left, we tend to only see what the next bad thing that the right is trying to do and to push and to struggle against it. But we have so many success stories that we can tell each other. Just to give you 2 examples, I led the team that wrote the social economic platform of the Labour Party in the last election, and you know what I did? I called my friends in the American think tank world and asked them, listen, do you have anything interesting about how to tax the super wealth or how to rebuild public education? And I read some, serious stuff that is being written in this, and this is one of the reasons why, in the end, I'm very proud of what we did, because we pushed the social economic debate in Israel to the left. Something that we failed to do. Like about the conflict and about other issues, we really push the debate to the left. And this is one example. The second example is that I think that we have a lot of things that we can learn from you guys. I also think that you can learn from the work that we are doing. And Maya is sitting here, and I had the privilege to be one of the staff members it was 5 years ago, and I served for 5 years in the union that Maya is now one of the leaders of the union. And we've actually done, and we are still doing, amazing labor organizing in Israel in the last decade. And this is something that usually doesn't cross the ocean. Like, you don't know what we are doing in this, exactly like sometimes we don't know what you are doing in other issues. We have organized 200,000 Israelis in the last decade to join labor unions. This is not something small, and I think one of the things that we are doing in the last 4 or 5 years, that we are bringing labor leaders and labor organizers from Israel to the States with the American Federation of Teachers, with Randy Weingarten, who is a friend who is leading it, and they are bringing labor organizers and activists to Israel, because it's not a one-sided thing. We have things that we can learn, we have things that we can teach, and of course, not only about social economic justice, but I think that the last thing is, again, we need to have a discussion that is not only based on moral outrage, we have to have a discussion based on power. And I think this is what needs to be changed.
Maya, speaking of unions, you had, I don't know to the extent to which, but I know to some extent that you've exchanged gatherings and informations and connections with unions in the US. What have you learned from what, in your particular work as a union organizer, you could learn from the US and they can learn from you?
When you compare the two labor markets here and in Israel, when I did it and when I was learning about how things are being organized here, I realized it helped me reflect also on the positive things that we have in Israel. For example, the right to unionize is a right in Israel by law. This is goes without saying. This is like a human right. This I'm recommending. But it also comes with with a challenge with it. Because we do have good laws that protect workers and protect us as organizers and to unionize workers. But together with that, our welfare state has been under attack for the last 30 years. Sometimes more radically, sometimes slowly being attacked and being eaten off. And also, I think culturally, even nowadays, organizing and unionizing in your workplace, it's not something that is considered to be a right by law. So it's kind of a weird thing that happened there. And I think for a long time, the fact that we had the law to protect us actually made us not organize ourselves in the way that we should. And this is something that was actually like sand in our eyes, this kind of the protection that we had by law. And this is something that nowadays we can actually learn so much from unions in the US, because in the US they don't have this protection and they have to organize like you should organize from the start. And it means really going there and being on the ground and talking to people and collecting people hand by hand and actually doing that. And I think that until Koach La'ovdim, which is the union I work with, until we were founded, didn't happen in Israel at all. And I think that in this case, we have so much to learn from how you do it here in the US. I mean, nowadays in Koach La'ovdim, all the time we're trying to progress and we're trying to think of how, models to organize, how to think about, not only, we are also a radical organization, so we're changing all the time and we're into learning and into making ourselves better and better all the time. And this connection to the US is actually a lot of potential for us and a lot of things that we can actually learn to how to organize.
Great.
Daniel, I want to bring you into this. One of the things that we're hearing from Chen, I think we're hearing from Rami, when Americans and many people in this room make contributions to and support what's going on in Israel for more progressive causes, we tend to do it through that lens of moral outrage, or we do it through civil society investments, and it's 501c3, and it flows through the New Israel Fund. How do we shift the lens so that there is an understanding, as there appears to be on the right, that part of the support that comes from here, if we're really going to win this fight, is going to have a more political lens to it? And I know you can't discuss that as a 501c3 agent yourself, but what can be done to bring that more political lens?
Right. So first of all, I have to say, Fida, I'm just really moved by what you said earlier. You know, Palestinian citizens of Israel I would look at you, but it's too hard to keep turning, are really walking the finest line of all of us. And I want you to know that we have your back, not just New Israel Fund, but everyone on this stage. And we understand that yours is the struggle that the entire state of Israel and the Jewish people will be judged by. And for you, Maya, does anyone remember the name Ben Hecht? Ben Hecht was sort of this Hollywood-era raconteur, right? I'm thinking a lot about Ben Hecht, Jeremy, these days. Probably not a very nice guy. But he once said, as I shared with Jeremy, he once said, do not tangle, he was a screenwriter and an activist, do not tangle with the Jews, he said. He was Jewish. They will give you a headache. And so Maya, who organized my organization in Israel, gave me massive headaches. But what Fida and Maya are doing in Israel is, of course, a new articulation, as it were, of what it means to do civil society work, right? And so your question about how we cross that line, well, first of all, you know, there's a lot that we can do as people who support 501c3s that is totally acceptable, but sometimes we're afraid to do it. Right? We can support our electeds to do what Brad is doing, right? We can support Israeli organizations who we are told by our fellow Americans, right, are not working for Israel's best interests when we, of course, know that they are. And we can educate ourselves about what not to be afraid of when we make that support. And I will say, J Street and the New Israel Fund, you as a C3 and a C4, us as a 501c3, we're important tools. But you have power, we have power. You know, we're not going to run for office in Israel, but we can expand our toolbox. In fact, last week, we gave you a brand new tool. We launched New Israel Fund, the Progressive Jewish Fund. Donor-advised funds are the fastest growing philanthropic vehicle in this country. It's a way for people to do their philanthropy. And what we realized was nobody has put together a values-driven, progressive Jewish collective home for all of our philanthropy in Israel and in the United States. So when we open up donor-advised funds that actually build power, Rami and Chen are talking about how you build power. Well, the truth is philanthropy and money are ways to build power. So when we build power here, it makes us easier to push our electeds at home, and it makes us easier to support people who are, by their own description, radical or walking between the raindrops. So it's all about courage and about building a bigger toolbox.
Right. I know that Jill wanted a minute because we want to bring the evening to a close, so I'm giving you a minute, and I trust you that you will keep it, and then final question to Fida, and we'll close.
I want to say one word about building young leadership, which we've been talking about. We know, of course, that there are 1,200 J Street U students here, which gives all of us huge hope. I also want to say that, as you might know, almost every liberal rabbinical school sends its students to Israel for a year of study in Jerusalem. And right now, more than 70% of those students every single year take part in a year-long Trua human rights program where we take them to the West Bank. They meet human rights leaders, like some of whom you've seen on stage today and other places. And just to quote Abby Weber, a current Jewish Theological Seminary student, who said in a panel today talking about this, she said it's a sea change. Just think. More than 70% of the newly minted rabbis and cantors will have had experiences that will help them to be human rights leaders on Israel. And lastly, very often those of us who are on the left, when we criticize Israel, we're told, well, how dare you sit in your comfortable living room and criticize Israel? Right? But we know, as Rami talked about, as I talked about, as we all talked about, conservative donors in the U.S. put hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into building settlements and transforming the Israeli media landscape and into directing public policy. And I am pretty sure that most of the billionaires like Adelson and Rennert and the others have way more comfortable living rooms than I do. So the right wing is really not shy about proactively remaking Israel in their own vision of a fundamentalist fortress that's allied with autocratic and anti-Semitic governments and with Christian evangelicals in the U.S. And those of us in the progressive camp also should be equally bold about investing our money where our values are in order to create the Israel that we want for the future.
So, Fida, to close our discussion, thank you, Jill. Fida, to close our discussion, you know, we moved back to our comfort Jewish zone, especially when it comes to funding. And you mentioned, you know, how not easy it is as a Palestinian to be in a conference. And again, we really appreciate you being here and all the other the many Palestinian speakers that we have here. No, it needs to be said because there is pressure that you have to face. But I want to ask you about that. Why do you think it's important for Palestinians to build bridges with progressive Jews and American Jews in particular?
Actually, I want to flip the question and ask why it's important for you to work with us. So, I'm really unique to this rule that sometimes everybody wants to work with us and nobody wants to talk with us. Even sometimes, unfortunately, when you visit an Arab country and you have an Israeli passport, so it's something that we all believe. And I know why. Being part of country that occupy your population, it's not easy. But being part of the Palestinian population, we talk about language, we talk about this is my language, this is my culture, this is my family who live in the West Bank. I know this is my pain that they live under occupation. But I'm citizen in Israel. I have a friend in Israel, I have life in Israel, and as a child who grown up in Waht al-Salam, Neve Shalom, I know how it's easy to build a partnership between people. So to be a bridge between Palestinian and Israel, it's really very unique, very complicated, and very special role that I have all my life. And I think it's very, very, very important. It's bring me to bring the hard question. Is Israel can be a Jewish country and equal country and just country even for 20% of the people who live there, my Palestinian minority? This is really important question that we should put here on the table and start to discuss it together in partnership. If you want to fight, if you want to have a peace and end the occupation, you need us. As a minority who live inside Israel, we are 40% of the left in Israel. Nothing will change without us. But even if we want to have good economy in Israel, we should address the problem of poverty in the Arab society. We should address the problem of violence and crime and illegal weapon that we have all over the society. This is a very important issue that we need to address, and you actually need to address and help us to make a real change, first of all, in the Palestinian society, and then build a very strong shared society. What's really unique in this room, I think, at least from what I feel in these 2 days, all the people here want to build equal life for everybody. All the people who here want to change the reality for better life for all of us. So we need each other to make this change.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fida. What a wonderful way for us to wrap up our conversation tonight. This has been a very far-reaching, wide-ranging discussion about our strategies for meeting this challenging moment. I'm looking forward to tomorrow when we're going to continue this with many of the other of the 2020 presidential candidates. There's many other sessions on all of these interesting topics and coming up with more answers on how we're going to rise to the moment. I hope you will all join me in thanking this tremendous panel of people leading the fights for the values that we all share. See you tomorrow.